Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Mavidvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. So once again, good morning to you all. A joyous May Day to you here in Atlanta, or Tucker, and Atlanta, I suppose, in general. It is a gorgeous day. I hope you're having a fine day where you are. We're studying the very last of Swami Prabhavananda's talk on yoga. Swami translated and commented on Patanjali's Yoga Sutra in his book, How to Know God. This is a summary, so to speak, of that book. We finished with our discussion of pranayama, and now we're going to talk about the next step. The next step is pratyahara, gathering the forces of the mind from going outward and bringing quietness to your body. Remembering that God is within the shrine of your own heart. Withdrawing your mind from the outside world and imagining that you have entered into the shrine of the heart, you shut the doors of the senses. Now, it's not a willful act of withdrawing from the senses. The Swami summarized it very nicely. If you're heading west and you turn around and start to head toward the east, you automatically leave behind the things of the west. If you turn your attention within to the shrine of your heart, you automatically leave behind the outgoing tendency. Now, this isn't something that happens overnight, of course. It's a years-long process, really. And you do it along with the other limbs of yoga, the yama, the niyama, the proper posture, the pranayama, which is automatic rather than a willful act again. And then pratyahara, the withdrawal of your, gathering of your mind. I like the way the Swami said that. Let me read that again. The next step is pratyahara, gathering the forces of the mind from going outward and bringing quietness to the body. So when you turn inward, by remembering that God is within the shrine of your heart, it automatically withdraws your mind from the outside world, and you can have the mental attitude, the Swami calls it imagining, that you have entered into the shrine of the heart and shut the door of the senses. But again, as I say, it doesn't need to be a willful act of slamming the door on the senses. You simply focus on what is within, and you are less likely to be drawn to that which is without and its remnants in the mind. This is what the Swami means by gathering the forces of the mind, so that they don't dissipate even as you turn your attention within. It's easy to let the mind wander uh, to its past impressions, its memories, and its projections. So before we go on to the next step, which is concentration, are there any questions about either pranayama, which we covered last week, or pratyahara, this withdrawal of the mind to within, gathering its forces, and turning its attention to turning your awareness, your attention to the shrine of the heart. Any comments or questions at all? Okay, apparently everyone is satisfied with their understanding of that. That's great. The next step is concentration. Dharana. Dharana is the Sanskrit. The next step is concentration upon the chosen ideal of God or the inner light within. What happens is that your mind becomes concentrated for a few moments, and then these moments grow. This is called dharana or dhyana or meditation. Though we don't actually practice meditation, we practice concentration. I want to make that distinction clear. You start with contemplation. What is it that I'm going to focus on? This chosen ideal, as he says. The next step is concentration upon the chosen ideal or God or the inner light within. In other words, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to deify it. It can simply be the inner light. What happens is that your mind becomes concentrated for a few moments, and then those moments grow. This is called dhyana or meditation. Though we don't actually practice meditation, we practice concentration. And as Patanjali points out, as you practice concentration, that's the end of the 6 limbs of yoga that are self-effort, and then something happens to you, he says. You slip into meditation, and through meditation to liberation. These are the last 2 limbs, 7 and 8. So any comments or questions about this idea of concentration, dharana, and its transition into meditation or dhyana? Okay. But when you can properly and really meditate, you begin to feel the cool breeze of the ocean, as it were, and a joy wells up within. Your faith grows. The feeling becomes intense and gives you ecstasy and samadhi. you come face to face with God, with the reality. Now, this is Savikalpa Samadhi, still within time, space, and causation. When he says you come face to face with God, this is what Christ means when he says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." It's exactly the same thing. You've purified your heart by this practice of yoga, and you come face to face with God, with the reality. Once you reach that, your whole vision, your whole life has changed. And that's the end of this talk on yoga. So this transition from, as the Swami says, when you can properly and really meditate, that is, concentrate for more than 2 minutes. That's the definition of meditation, that you can concentrate for more than 2 minutes and 24 seconds. That's the technical definition. If you can manage 2 minutes, you're slipping into it. And that concentration, it's not like you're willing, no, you are quietly allowing your attention to maintain itself on one mantra, on one idea, on one image, on one cycle of the breath, whatever it is that you're doing. And you're able to sustain that for 2 minutes. It's a long process to get there because the mind wishes to, the left mind, with its activities of thinking and interpreting, wants to intrude. But you sink below that into a kind of silence. But when you can properly and really meditate, you begin to feel the cool breeze of the ocean, as it were. And a joy wells up within. And this is a fact. It's like an artesian well that has been uncapped. It suddenly begins to bubble up within you. Your faith grows. It can't help it. It isn't as if your faith grows by your will. Your faith grows because, oh, this is what I've been looking for all this time. I've been fooling around with all the outside world and this and that. And that's not a bad thing. It's just ultimately a fruitless thing. So you then have this working faith that sustains your effort, and then the joy wells up within. Your faith grows naturally because you have the experience. The feeling becomes intense and gives you ecstasy and samadhi. You come face to face with God, with the reality. Once you reach that, your whole vision, your whole life has changed. So as I said, that's the end of this talk. All that we've studied about yoga, from the very beginning of this talk to the end, this has been several weeks we've been at this. Anything at all in the way of comment, question, anything you'd like to share about who you are, what you do, what it is that you still have a question about, please. This is how we do this together.
Brother Shankara?
Yes, Swayam.
Yeah, mine is more of sharing what, for the whatever 2+ years that I've been part of this philosophy and process. One thing I think I have either understood or come to realize is that the 8 steps are not sequential. Um, they kind of happen in parallel.
Mm-hmm.
And also drawing upon the other yogas, the synthesis, a little, some Gyan yoga, some Karma yoga, tend to complement because challenges come all the time and it is somewhat difficult to sit down and concentrate the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Those times, going to a reading of one of the Gyan yogas and that um, logical, that those descriptions are helpful to increase the faith in this. Or so basically, it's just a pulling from the different things seems to help the progress and not
Yes,
stagnate.
there are several aids to our turning away from our life in the West. Life in the West being uh, defined as the land of rebirth and death. Um, not a bad thing, just ultimately not what we really want. And so we turn away and we turn our face to the east, to the shining, rising sun of spiritual awareness. And there are these 4 yogas that Swami Vivekananda taught: work, that is to say, karma yoga; worship, devotion, or bhakti yoga; psychic control, which we've just been talking about; control of the mind, control of the psyche; and wisdom or philosophy. And Vivekananda says, take one of these or more or all 4. Use them and be free. And so, as you pointed out, Swam, each of these yogas has something to offer us in a way, as a way to keep our self headed toward the light and free ourselves from those things that would restrain us in the West. Thank you. You're absolutely right.
Thank you, Brother Shankar, for reinforcing. Thank you.
Uh,
I,
anything else from anyone?
I agree with Swam that they don't happen, or we don't follow the different paths or the different steps sequentially. And sometimes we have to, those of us who have a lot of different things in the world pulling at us, and I'm not talking about just distractions, I'm talking about things we actually have to
Yes, our duties. Yeah.
into, that sometimes we have to shift on the fly, so to speak.
Yes, indeed.
I mean, sometimes my morning meditation gets cut short because of a 20-pound creature that lives in my house. And I just have to shift and just, hurry it up. And then, and then, that's why for me personally, it's so important to have things throughout the day and for every activity that I can not completely lose contact with the divine presence. It's not like, okay, I meditate and then go about my day and then come back and meditate later. It's like just really trying to stay with it.
Yes.
Reminding myself I have a lot of little tricks to do that, but yeah, and unless we are really have very few responsibilities anymore. And I don't know anybody. I mean, people may be older, they may be retired, but that doesn't mean they're not really busy.
Yeah.
So I think, taking from all the yogas, studying all of them, combining them and allowing them to combine for us as needed. Yeah.
Well, there are 3 hallmarks of someone who is true, sincere aspirant on the spiritual path, a yogi, if you will. The three hallmarks of the yogi are fluidity, just exactly what you said, changing on the fly. I'm doing this, but this, because of circumstances, it's no longer appropriate. I can't do it right now. So I change to something else. Not forgetting, as you said, the divine within and what's really true. So you shift gears fluidly, without resentment, without fuss or bother, as much as possible. The second hallmark is integrity. Integrity means lack of hypocrisy. You're completely honest with yourself. All right, this cat has troubled me, and it's the nature of the cat to do what the cat does. There's no sense fussing about it. Sometimes we just get angry because it's just so annoying. But even in that anger, the anger doesn't last long because of your honesty about it. As Jill Bolte Taylor says, it'll last 90 seconds only if you're willing to let it go at the end of the 90 seconds. So first fluidity, then integrity, lack of hypocrisy, honesty about what's going on in the moment, and who you are and what is the truth in the moment. And the third is humility. There is no reason why the world should go just as I want it to go. There is absolutely no reason. As Chaitanya's prayer says, "O my mind, be humbler than a blade of grass. Be patient and forbearing like the tree. Take no honor to thyself. Give honor to all." And then, as you pointed out, Cindy, whatever trick it is, the one that the Chaitanya recommends is chant unceasingly the name of the Lord, which is, even though you go about doing something else, whatever that device, that trick, as you said, that you use, well, the one that Chaitanya suggests, because it brings that vibration literally into the moment, is to chant the name of the Lord silently within, out loud if you have to. Swami Prabhavananda said, there are times when you must literally shout your mantra to shout down all of the other things that are trying to attract your attention. So thank you, Sharda. That was just exactly right. So if we think of ourselves as fluid, having integrity, being straightforward and truthful with ourselves, and if we are with ourselves, then we will be with the world. And then this business of humility. There's no reason the world should shape itself so that everything goes easily for me every minute. Anything else from anyone? This is wonderful.
Brother Shankara.
Yes, Liam.
Yes, I just wanted to share a quote that I read yesterday from Carl Jung that really resonated in your, what Sharda just shared and what you just discussed about the, dealing with the outer world. It's from his Red Book, and it goes, just as you become part of the manifold essence of the outer world through your bodies, so you become a part of the manifold essence of the inner world through your soul. This inner world is truly infinite in no way poorer than the outer one. Man lives in two worlds. A fool lives here or there, but never here and there. And this like what Sharda was saying about having to deal with the responsibilities. I find that a lot of these tools of concentration, contemplation, and meditation that I practice when I have free time uh, help kind of they're like for me they're like training to help me remember that while I'm doing something mundane like going to check the mail or washing dishes, and really keeping that awareness of the infinite and divine while I'm doing everyday activities. Like I find that that's I guess like my goal for my spirituality is to not just think of the divine while I'm at a designated time only, but to carry that throughout all my activities as much as to the best of my ability.
Absolutely, Liam. Perfect. Perfect. Absolutely. That is exactly it. Because if sure, our intense experiences will at first come in moments, but we can carry that forward into the day, that feeling. And then, and remember, oh yes, I am that as well as this, as Jung pointed out. And Sri Ramakrishna says you ultimately come to understand that neither is more and the other less. It's just the same thing in two different aspects, two different forms, or formless aspects. So that recollectedness is exactly it. Thank you, Liam. That was very eloquently said. And I liked your examples, going and getting the mail, washing the dishes. There's a Zen saying, before nirvana, before illumination, chop wood, carry water. After illumination, chop wood, carry water. But you chop wood and carry water as an illumined soul.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
one more thing I try very hard is not to let a single day go without doing my initiated mantra, whether I'm able to concentrate or not. And if I cannot do it at a set time, whenever I get time, I go sit and maybe do whatever number of rounds I can do, just so that I don't let go of that habit of saying my japa.
Perfect. Perfect. This is exactly what Swami Prabhavananda said. We have this high ideal as our first instruction of meditation. The chosen ideal, or that aspect of the divine that is real or appeals to you. The chosen ideal is you yourself, no different. Learn to feel that presence. How? Patience. And then perseverance. Just what you said, Swayam. We try not to let a day go by where we don't do something to keep us grounded in that. And then the fourth instruction, Swami Prabhavananda's fourth instruction, expectation. I have no idea how close I am. And it doesn't matter how close I am to the goal. I know that ultimately that cap will come off that artesian spring, and instead of a trickle, it will be a flood. And that is what I will sail my little boat on for the rest of my life. So thank you, Swami. That's it. And Swami Sarvadevananda gave me that instruction one time very directly. I had been coming to the Hollywood Temple for a long time, and this phenomenon had occurred from time to time, but I hadn't said anything about it. There were just those days when I would sit and the mind was like a sludge pot. It was like a quagmire. And so I just came to call it the mud mind. That's how I referred to it to myself. And so one day I finally, Sarvadevananda and I were in the chapel after the morning meditation, the morning service, just the two of us. And I said to him, Swami, sometimes, and it had happened that day, of course, sometimes I just have this mud mind. And no matter what I try, it doesn't seem to make any difference. I'm just slogging through the mud. And he said, pay no attention to it. Pay no attention to it. Just continue with your practices and you will see. You will rise again to those and even higher. And he was right. So we must not be daunted by those dry times. Some people that experience it as dryness. I experienced it as this quagmire, just like walking through sticky mud.
Thank you so much for sharing that very encouraging experience, Brother Shankar.
Anything else from anyone? All right. Well, those of you who have had something to say, thank you for helping tie this off, because that's exactly. And of course, what does Edith Tipple and of course the Swami go on to next? Where's the real difficulty? So the next talk that we'll deal with, the next talk that we'll take up, is called Mind and Its Control. Mind and its control. How do we do this? Most people are driven like leaves before the wind. They live, think, and act subject to the moods and impulses of their own minds. But what is the true nature of the mind? What is the subconscious mind? And why do we have to control it? Notice that he didn't just talk about our waking awareness. He's talking about our subconscious mind. And this is a very important distinction that becomes very clear to us as we practice contemplation and concentration. First, we become aware of the contents of our everyday waking awareness, and then we sink below that and we become aware of what it is that's in our subconscious mind that we're not constantly thinking about or aware of, that is prompting all of what we're aware of. What is the subconscious mind, and why do we have to control it? These are not academic problems, but they are vital questions for every spiritual aspirant. When beginning to practice spiritual disciplines, the aspirant realizes the need for the control of the mind, both conscious and subconscious. And this is exactly what Swami was referring to, and what Cindy was referring to, and what Liam was referring to. We have to have a grasp that I can't let this out of my control. I can't let this out of my control. So how do I keep it under control and remain aware of what's there. When beginning to practice spiritual disciplines, the aspirant realizes the need for the control of the mind, both conscious and subconscious. By spiritual life, I mean, this is the Swami now, by spiritual life, I mean the hunger in the heart to see, to know, to experience God. That's what brings us to this. That's why we're here on a Saturday morning. We have this hunger. And however we may define it, we may not define it as a deity. We may define it as the truth, that I have the hunger to see, to know, to experience the truth. Doesn't matter how you conceptualize it. It's recognizing that there is something in me that definitely wants to go beyond this repetitiousness, this hamster wheel life, where I'm active, and get nowhere. It's always the same. The movie may change in front of me, the movie playing, but the elements of it are the same. So the Swami says, by spiritual life, I mean the hunger in the heart to see, to know, to experience God or the truth. When we come to the understanding that there is no happiness in the finite, we understand that there is only misery if we follow our moods and impulses. Then we know that in God alone are peace and freedom. The fundamental truth of spiritual life and the purpose of life itself can be reached only when we are absorbed in God, or, if you will, the truth. So before we go ahead, the Swami has made these very emphatic statements. Any comments or questions, any reservations about what he's saying and why this is so, why this is so, why this is the fact. The fundamental truth of spiritual life and the purpose of life itself can be reached only when we are absorbed in God. And this absorption does not happen all at once. Very rarely, the Swami was asked about that, like Scrooge. Could it really happen overnight, Swami? Yes, very rare, but it can happen. Well, that's because there's been so much preparation before. In other lifetimes, that's the explanation. But for most of us, it isn't that we deliberately keep one foot in the world and one foot in the other. It's as Sarada pointed out earlier, we have our duties. We have our things that we have to do, and we have our companions and people that we live with, be they fur persons or human beings that are part of what's going on around us. So until we know for certain that everything that we experience is God, then we are absorbed in God as is experienced in our understanding at that moment. So it isn't that nothing happens until we're absorbed in God. No, we slowly and slowly become immersed, or another word, the way to think about it is we slowly and slowly sink below the level of the ordinary, and we become absorbed further and further in the inner realm, which is extraordinary. Jesus said, "Be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." Each of us, each one of us, has to overcome this world. How? It is a vast world, but it actually is in our own mind. This is the point. And so very clear this becomes as you practice your spiritual practices, as you do your spiritual practices, that the world is not out there. It appears to us to be out there, but actually it's in here and throughout the body. And we have this incredible mechanism, the brain, the nervous system, the heart, this action and experience suit that is our vehicle for being part of it. But it is a vast world, but it actually is in our own mind. Your world, your universe, shares much with the rest of the people who are with us here today and myself, but it is also unique. You are unique. Your world, your universe is unique. And it is because it is that which is, as the Swami says, in your own mind. That is the point. If you analyze, you will find that whatever you see in this world is a mirror of your own mind, your mind's own reading, and nothing else. As in darkness we see a rope and mistake it for a snake, so is this whole creation, the creation of our mind. Now, this rope snake business keeps being a metaphor. Why? Because it's so powerful. But it isn't that there's nothing there. We didn't make it up. We just misunderstood it. We misinterpreted it. We didn't see it for what it is. And so, because we have these parts of our brain called the amygdala, which are constantly on the alert to keep us safe and apart from danger. If something looks like a snake, we interpret it as a snake because a snake is dangerous. Oftentimes, our fears and doubts are just exactly that, a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of what's there. So, before we go on to the Swami's, he's about to, the next sentence says, the main principle. So before we go on to the main principle, are there any concerns, questions, comments about what's been said so far? About the
Brother Shankara.
Yes, please. Somesh.
See, you said that that the world is full of miseries and there is no happiness unless we shift towards the self-realization. But that's not true. We have such a happy moments, So I feel like sometimes that this self-realization they make the world very miserable for us to pull towards it. And
Somesh,
it
it isn't that we have no happiness.
yeah.
It's just that it doesn't last.
Mm.
It's just that it can't be depended upon. It comes and it goes. Now, if you're content with that, and Somesh, there's no reason you should not be content with that. There is no imperative reason that you should not be content with that.
Mm-hmm.
If you are content with the fact that happiness, these experiences of happiness are there and then are replaced by unhappiness, a period of misery, a period of unhappiness. Well, there's just this one consideration. As Patanjali points out so eloquently in his Yoga Sutras, even our happiness, even our outwardly directed happiness, has within it the seed of unhappiness. Why? Because we're afraid we'll lose it, or we are constantly wanting more of it. And we can see people who go through the world completely addicted. They went to one nice restaurant. Well, they want to go to another nice restaurant and another nice restaurant and another nice restaurant. And the penalties may be great or may not be great in the moment. But how much happiness can there be from just going to another fine restaurant? And how much unhappiness there is if suddenly they lose their income and can't pay those credit card bills and can't go to those restaurants, but they're addicted to going to that kind of place. So this is what Patanjali points out, that even in our outward directed worldly happiness, there is the seed of misery. It isn't that we don't have that happiness, but as I've just explained, Patanjali very correctly identifies that it has two possible strong deficits. We want more of it, and we fear losing it, and we may actually lose it. Now, Swami Vivekananda dearly loved chocolate ice cream. Really did, really liked it.
Mm-hmm.
One time at a dinner at Ridgely Manor in New York, he had already gotten up and left the table, and if you were in that dining room, you'd see there's an archway. And he had marched, Swamiji apparently always moved quickly. He had marched from his place at the table and was already to that archway when Mrs. Leggett said, "Oh, Swamiji, we have chocolate ice cream for dessert." And it's said that he did a military precision 180 and returned to his place at the table just as quickly as he had left. Now, the only difference between Swami Vivekananda and perhaps someone like ourselves is that if chocolate ice cream completely disappeared from universe, there was no more possibility of any chocolate ice cream under any circumstances. Vivekananda would not have given it more than a moment's thought. he would have said, what a shame, and never thought about it again.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
shall I read a few lines, maybe about 4 or 5 lines from this book, The Soul's Journey to Its Destiny by Swami Ashokananda?
Please, yes.
I think it might tie in with this last discussion.
Good.
So basically, this is the end of the chapter called Why We Are What We Are.
Ashokananda was a psychologist.
Yeah. So he says, in closing, I shall repeat what I said at the beginning. It does not matter in what state a person is. If by some means he can be made aware of his true nature, in that one moment he can wake up from his dream of this vicious reality. If you say, let us be practical about it, I shall concur. But I shall add, don't wait till the whole story is finished. Let the first chapter be finished, if you will. After that, friends, why not wake up? This story will never come to an end. So, after you have enjoyed the first part of it, you can say, it is that kind of story. I don't have to finish it and wake up.
It is that kind of story. Yes. And in the beginning, he's describing the situation that happened with Scrooge. It can happen in a moment. For most of us, not. So we finish the first chapter or the first 3 chapters, whatever it is that takes to convince us that, oh, I know how this story goes and how it's going to end. Perhaps I don't have to finish it. And as I said, Swami Ashokananda said, I do not rule you by love. He was comparing himself to Swami Prabhavananda, who said to his disciples, I rule you by love. I do not rule you by love. I do not rule you by philosophy. This is what Swami Nikhilananda said to his disciples. I rule you by philosophy, or some words to that effect. Ashokananda said, I do not rule you by love. I do not rule you by philosophy. I rule you by psychology. In other words, I know your mind better than you do. And he did. If you read his disciple, Sister Gargi, she wrote a book, A Heart Poured Out, which is the biography of Swami Ashokananda, her guru. She was a nun at the San Francisco convent, and she also wrote books under the name Marie Louise Burke about Swami Vivekananda, the New Discoveries series. An immensely impressive woman. And she's the one who told me that story about Ashokananda. But you can read it also in that book, A Heart Poured Out. Thank you, Swayam. That was perfect.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
Anything else from anyone? Okay, we have a few minutes left. I'll read on. The main principle of spiritual discipline is control of the thought waves of the mind. Mind you, now, the Swami has made a distinction. The main principle of spiritual discipline is control of the thought waves of the mind, the vibrations of consciousness that occur within our left hemisphere, is what he's pointing to. The main principle of spiritual discipline is control of the thought waves of the mind. The very moment you control the thought, the Atman is revealed. The very moment you control the thought, the Atman is revealed. So that control is not superficial. It is not making the mind blank or unconscious. You know you can't make the mind blank unless you become unconscious. What you have to do is get to the bottom of it in order to find the treasure. At the bottom of the lake, you have to take away all the mud. Then the lake will be crystal clear. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that the pure mind and Atman are identical because Atman or God becomes reflected perfectly on a pure mind. And all four of the yogas give you a technology for attaining this perfectly pure mind. As the Swami will develop that thought. Remember the talks, mind and its control. And again, this clarity comes and goes. The water will become clear, then it'll become muddy again. Then it'll become clearer, then it'll become muddy again. But the periods of clarity increase, the periods of muddiness decrease, until, just as if you were learning to play the guitar, you slowly and slowly learned the chords, learned the keys, learned the rhythms, and you, in the beginning, you'd make nothing but mistakes. Then you get a little bit better and a little bit better. Fewer mistakes, more periods of playing well. Finally, the 100th time that you've played a particular little sequence of notes and chords on the guitar, you're beginning to get fairly good at it. And there's no end to this. You are an infinite being. There's no end to the possibility for improvement. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that the pure mind and Atman are identical because Atman, or God, becomes reflected perfectly on a pure mind. What are the first lines of Sri Chaitanya's prayer? His recommendation for how to attain this pure mind. Chant the name of the Lord and his glory unceasingly, that the mirror of the heart may be wiped clean and quenched that mighty forest fire, worldly lust, raging furiously within. What is that forest fire he's talking about? These thought waves of the mind. The thought waves of the mind. So that'll do it for the reading for this week. It's 11:59. I'd like to leave with just a moment or two for any final thoughts or questions from anyone.
Brother Shakara, this is
Yes, Haima.
How to Know God connects so well with realizing God. The books he describes how a man can never know his real self as long as the thought waves and the ego sense are being identified. He perfectly connects this book with that book. If any doubts, if we read the How to Know God book, first chapter, boy, it clears all the doubts. And anybody who has doubts, they must read the first chapter, How to Know God, and that just clears every doubt in the world.
Thank you, Haima.
It's just so connected. Both the books are well connected with this.
Yes, of course they are.
Mm-hmm.
They're both Swami Prabhavananda's books.
Yes.
And Swami Prabhavananda, like Swami Vivekananda,
Yeah, I can see.
the only book that Swami Vivekananda ever wrote was the book Raja Yoga.
Yes.
He took time out of that incredibly busy cyclonic monk schedule of his because his disciples in England and the United States requested it of him to write his commentary and translation and commentary on and translation of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which he titled Raja Yoga. It's because this is such an important work. Patanjali's work is so important and so accessible as a technology, as a workbook for Westerners and for those who are accustomed to the Western way of thinking, whether they were born here or not, the Western scientific reductionist way of thinking. Swami Prabhavananda discovered that Swami Vivekananda published Raja Yoga in 1896. It was a bestseller both in England and in the United States and probably throughout the English-speaking world. In any event, by the 1940s, Swami Prabhavananda discovered that his Western disciples had trouble with the somewhat Victorian English that Swami Vivekananda used to write that book. I mean, that's the language that he spoke. and he was speaking to a different audience, an audience that had a different frame of reference than the post-World War II atomic age disciples that Swami Prabhavananda was dealing with. So Swami Prabhavananda decided that relying on and often using language from Raja Yoga, but interpreting it for the modern English-speaking public, he created the book How to Know God, which was his translation of and commentary on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And as Haima just pointed out, it is a masterwork. It is an absolute masterwork. And it makes it so accessible to us. We'll take up that book soon, as soon as we're finished with one of the other books that we're studying. We'll take up How to Know God.
That would be a great connecting book, Brother Shankara, How to Know God. After this one, it's just amazingly done, that book. So clear and it's easily understandable.
Yeah, the two books were suggested for as soon as we're finished with books that we're working on. How to Know God and Swami Ranganathananda's book, Divine Grace, which it's been a couple of years since we studied that. Again, another masterwork.
Yes. And it's all in our thought waves controlling. our thought waves are the ones we let the mind, if we let the mind control us. I know we've all done that in the past, and we still sometimes, some of us probably still do that too. We all of us are guilty for this. And then as long as we let the thought waves control, that is the ego sense is right there. And then we will never be able to capture that enlightenment.
It's so useful for us. Thank you, Haima. You're absolutely right. It's so useful for us. I wanted to interrupt you
Yes.
because of that wonderful definition of the ego sense of egoism that John Dobson gave in that talk on the equations of Maya.
He did.
Egoism is no mystery. It is no mystery. It is a genetic program to get us enough to eat, proper air to breathe, and to cause us to procreate. That's what egoism is. And if you want to know more, go back to that talk.
Yes.
And as I said, I selected portions of it, of his talk, to read for that Sunday morning talk. But the entirety of the talk is posted as an attachment, as a PDF. And it's, if you want to know what egoism is,
Yes.
and what it is that causes all of this forest fire of worldly lust within us, Dobson just takes it apart and nails it down and says, look, here it is. There's no mystery.
Yes.
There's no accusation. It is necessary for the maintenance of the race itself. For, as Holy Mother said, the game to go on.
Totally agree with you, Brother Shankara. And this one little test for our ego is half glass full attitude, which I call it. When there is somebody gives you half glass of water, I can say, oh, that's all? Only half a glass? Why can't you give me full glass?
Yes, instead of being grateful for having any at all.
Or I can say, oh, thank God, at least she gave me half a glass full of water. That is the test. Test for the ego, to test our own ego. A lot of times we could go this way or that way, bitter or better. So
yes, well, as long as we have somehow, if we're sustaining a sense of lack,
yes,
if we're somehow sustaining a sense of lack,
ego feeds on it. Ego feeds on the lack. Ego feeds on the wrong. It wants to prove that the other stuff is wrong all the time. That
yeah.
it is right. It breeds on wrongness, not the rightness. So we just have to get there.
We have two hemispheres of the brain. One is dedicated to keeping us to keeping us fed and successfully procreating.
Thank you, Brother.
The other, the right hemisphere of the brain, has an entirely different set of values.
Thank you, Brother Shikra.
Thank you, Haima. Anything else, dears? Anything at all?
Brother Shankara,
Yes.
I am going to try and share this. It's been a while, and I have not processed it that well in my mind. But one of the Drigdrishya Viveka talks basically defined.
Would you just translate that Sanskrit for those of us who don't?
It is the seen versus the seer discrimination.
Yes. Okay.
So the gist is what they describe is the three attachments of the ego, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
The one with the mind is natural. Just like if there's a mind, it is going to reflect. Like the mirror, you come in front of the mirror, it's going to reflect.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot unbreak it. The attachment to the body is karmic, and when the prarabdha karma or the current karma is over, it's going to drop off, so you don't need to work on it. The third one, which they say, is the ignorance. That I think this is where I have to think a little bit more. But the connection with the Atman or the Brahman is the ignorance, that there is no connection. The Atman is ever free. And the mistake is what is kind of connecting us there. And that's what we need to break.
Yes, it's that we're seeing something that distracts us instead of seeing what's actually there. And this is this mistake about the Atman. You know, when we get a glimpse of the reality, sometimes our first experience of it is frightening, because it seems like it's going to take away the other two, the body mind. And so Swami Prabhavananda was asked, well, Swami, if I attain knowledge of the Atman, won't I lose everything? And the Swami said, no, my child, you don't lose anything, you gain everything. And if you stop and think, this was a very funny question to ask of a realized soul who knew the truth of the Atman. Had he lost anything? No, he had become the most charming, erudite, articulate, fun person you could possibly imagine. But this person, who was very sincere, the Swami didn't say, what, you hypocrite? No, no, no. They were asking this question, won't I lose everything? By that they meant their body, mind, and the personality associated with it. And the Swami said, no, my child, you won't lose anything, you will gain everything.
Brother Shankara, this is
Yes.
Janaki.
Yes, Janaki.
What do you do about family members who sincerely love you,
Mm-hmm.
but truly believe that you would be happier and they would feel better if you lived your life differently, like more like a conventional life?
The only thing to do is to be radiant in their presence and love them with all your heart. They're well-meaning,
Yes.
but as you said or alluded to, they are uncomfortable because of your change of life, the way you're changing, the way you're living. So if you just are humble and serviceful in their presence and radiant with the love that you have for not only them as an individual, but the divine within them, then as a transactional therapist will tell you, there's no possibility but them changing. I'll tell you a personal story. My late wife, Marjorie Jean Anderson Kemper, was a cradle Catholic. When she saw I had taken up Vedanta seriously in 1973, she genuinely feared for my immortal soul. Now, in addition to the natural wifely possessiveness of my time, which is completely understandable thing. It goes both ways in a relationship, a married relationship or any other intimate relationship. There became this resistance to my spending time on the Vedanta Society and all of that. I said this started in 1973 when she became clear that I really had found something that I was going to stick with. And it persisted until 1987.
Wow. Wow.
So all I could do was be as faithful, as truthful, and as loving as I could be, but persist, because persistence has its own persuasive power. But I tell you, what actually happened was she had some experience. Her allegiance as a Catholic, she was actually a heretic during these years. Her allegiance was not to the adult Jesus, but to the Mother Mary and the infant Jesus. So in 1987, she had some experience of the Mother, some very powerful experience. And at that time, then, her resistance about Vedanta disappeared. Mother pictures, particularly of the Virgin of Guadalupe, began to appear all over the house. Any image of the Mother of any kind was welcome. So we sometimes just, depending on how close our relationship is, we just have to be persistent. And as I say, persistence has its own power of persuasion.
So just to follow that up a little bit, what if though what they say to you makes you have doubts? It makes you think I'm doing this all wrong. I mean, am I even just making all this up in my head?
It's well to then remember that Sri Ramakrishna himself had such doubts, and we have resort to our teachers and to the scriptures. It was ultimately a teacher, the Bhairavi Brahmani, that reassured Sri Ramakrishna that he was not, because people were telling him exactly what you just said. And he had doubts that maybe this is all, I'm making all this up. This is all hallucinations like they're telling me it is. No, this is not easy. It's simple conceptually, but it is not easy. It's not meant to be easy. The reasons for that are that the game itself wants to go on.
Mm-hmm.
This is why these genetic imperatives that John Dobson pointed to. And those people who are close to you in this way and giving you this pressure are very much in the grip of those genetic imperatives and feel that you are ignoring the great truth that they believe in so strongly.
Yeah.
I'm glad you asked that question, Janaki. And it will happen to all of us.
Well, I've been struggling a lot lately with this. My mother, as you know, is coming for a week's visit, a week from today.
Yes. We cannot expect other people to understand our empirical experiences. And we have to trust ourselves and our teachers and the scriptures, because other people will try to push us off the center that we have found for ourselves. There's no two ways about it.
Mhm.
So if I were you, I would call Sarvadevananda and ask him. He will doubtless have some very wise words to say. He's been at this a very long time and now has many, many disciples and has become very sweet and very loving. You have his cell phone number, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Okay. That's the way he prefers to be contacted. Hold on to that plow, Janaki. Hold on, hold on. Hold on to that plow, hold on. It's an old spiritual. It's a beautiful song.
Well, since my name means furrow, it kind of makes sense.
I hadn't even thought of that. Yes, that's right.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
I guess I'm in a very sharing mood today. I've been talking a lot. This is basically just a touching personal story involving a friend of mine and myself. So there is a temple or a church dedicated to Mother Mary and Infant Jesus in the city of Bangalore in India.
Mm-hmm.
And my dear friend and her husband are both physicians and very successful. Several years ago, her husband had a near fatal car accident, and her entire staff prayed for her and introduced her to this church. And she would religiously go and light a candle, and he recovered. So after that, every Thursday, whenever she's in town, she doesn't miss a chance to go and light the candle.
Mm-hmm.
And when I've had some difficulties in life, she prayed for me and she would light a candle on my behalf.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I go to India, we make it a point to go visit the church and light a candle. So I
Mm-hmm.
just felt like I wanted to share that.
Well, if we believe the Christian gospel, Mary is an incarnation of the Mother of the universe. So this is why she's the intercessor, just as Holy Mother, Sri Sharda Devi, people would go to her and say, oh, ask the master for this and ask the master for that. And she herself, like we read recently in one of the classes on her life, there was this horrible thunderstorm that was going to be dangerous, at the very least inconvenient, perhaps even very dangerous to a group of her disciples that were traveling on foot. And so she went outside and prayed to the master. Oh, master, moderate this storm. Don't destroy these people with this storm. And if you read the lives of the saints, the Christian saints, you will see that they have tremendous belief in the power of the Holy Mother. And by the way, my late wife did not die a heretic. It rather annoyed her, in truth, that she didn't, because she'd gotten a kind of a pride about it. But it turns out that John Paul II, the Pope, was also a Marianist, also had the Mother Mary at the heart of his spiritual practice. And so because they wanted to beatify him and ultimately canonize him, it had to be decided that Marianism, as it was called, as a heresy. Marianism was no longer a heresy. It was permissible. And at the same time, because of his disbelief in it, the Catholic Church also did away with the concept of limbo, this place where all the souls of children who never had a chance to be baptized in the one true faith, where their souls resided, somewhere between here and the true heaven. It was decided that this was a misperception. And so all of those souls were released as if they had ever been imprisoned. And in any event, yes, the Mother Mary and the infant Jesus are powerful and loving. And if you want to read an interesting story, just as a spiritual story, read the story of the creation, the deliberate creation of the Virgin of Guadalupe by Mother Mary and the Native American, so-called, we call Mexican, Mayan, Aztec. She was widespread. The mother of the universe, as she was known to them, Tonantzin. Tonantzin and Mother Mary merged to become the Virgin of Guadalupe. And it's a fascinating story. So you can just Google the story of the Virgin of Guadalupe. You'll find a fascinating narrative of what happened. Tonal, means the universe or the cosmos. Tzin means mother or protectress. Tonantzin. She was the traditional benign form of the mother in what we call Mexico.
Thank you so much, Brother Shankar.
Thank you, dear. Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankar, this is Katrina.
Hello, Katrina.
Hi to everyone. I just want to respond to what Janaki spoke of. And it reminds me of three things. Number one, I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to question religion or spirituality. I've always thought if I can't question anything, then I'm not sure that's an idea that I want to accept, or because I think it has to become known to me inside, and the only way it can really become known to me inside if I'm able to question it. And it reminds me of three things. One, in the Bible, it says, study to show thyself approval. I remember coming up through Sunday school, that's what one of the deacons would always say at the end, study to show thyself approval. And then also, when you spoke on John Dobbs, I remember you starting off, if I can recall, he said that most of the time we don't really believe in our heart what we say we believe. And then you've also in your teachings basically said, I'm sharing this with you, and but you don't have to accept it. Well, to me, all those three things gives you the freedom to concentrate, contemplate, and then discover the truth of it within your own self. So I think that's the best way to go, because even last week there's this affirmation that I say, and I broke each sentence down, and I asked myself, do I really believe it? I say it, but do I really believe it? And the first part starts with God is my help in every need. And I asked myself, do I really believe it? And the answer was no. I say it, but do I really believe it? And so I just started saying, breaking down the affirmation sentence by sentence. And really what's happened is the more I said, and I was open to myself in terms of how I really felt, I could see myself now starting to believe those things that I'm saying. So just it rounded up, I think it's good to question. I think it's if you have doubt, accept them. But like you say, continue on. And the truth of it, if it is some truth in it, will reveal itself to you.
Oh, Katrina, how beautifully and eloquently said. And if you remember earlier in today's discussion, it was brought up about one of the hallmarks of the true spiritual aspirant is integrity. And part of integrity is self-determination. And you're absolutely right. You must be able to question, and you must be able to find out the truth for yourself. And the only way to do it, as you just so eloquently pointed out, is to be honest with yourself. To say, do I really mean this? Is this really a truth for me, or is this just something I'm saying? Well, it's fine to have provisional faith in things that you've been taught and take a stand for them. But we have to acknowledge that that's what I'm doing. It isn't that I myself know the truth of it. One of Swami Vivekananda's chief disciples was a Swami named Sadananda. Sadananda was very, very deeply schooled in the Christian scriptures and also in the writings and teachings of Adi Shankaracharya. And he used to quote from them, and whenever he was talking to anyone, including Swami Vivekananda. And finally, one day, Swami Vivekananda interrupted him and said, Sadananda, that's all very well and good, but what do you know? Because he was quoting what Adi Shankaracharya knew and what Christ knew. And so Vivekananda kind of put his feet to the fire. What do you know? So as Sri Ramakrishna used to say over and over when people would quote these scriptural passages to him, that's all very well, but you must assimilate that. Thank you, Katrina. That was just right on the money. And I like the 3 points that you brought up. Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankar, I just wanted to add or share with, based on what Katrina was just sharing, what kind of came up for me was just the idea that, and I've confessed that I haven't read the entire Bible, New or Old Testament, but from what I have read, it seems that many of the significant stories of the prophets and the disciples are stories around them, quote, losing their faith or having doubt and, in God's will. And so it's just kind of, for me, I remember that when I'm not, when I feel like I'm falling short of, having that pure conviction, and remembering that, much of the religious canon in the West is written about individuals who, even Moses, often doubted or tried to evade. Maybe not often, but there were significant moments where he tried to evade God's commands to him.
Yes.
So if I don't. So yeah, so I just kind of try to remember that, like, even Moses fell short of and he's considered to be one of the great religious figures of that particular religion, and many disciples of Jesus as well.
Jesus at Gethsemane, will you take this cup from my lips? He did not want to go through with that horrible death. The human side of him did not want to go through with that horrible death. He knew what was ahead and say, will you take this cup from my lips? But if it be thy will, it will be done. So we must never, ever, ever think of ourselves as bad and wrong for having doubts or for falling short, as we may think of it. As Vivekananda said, I am so glad I made those mistakes. Many mistakes I made. I'm so glad I made them because they created what I am now. And if you read the saints that are in that book, Love Poems from God, they all say the same thing. Perfection is something that comes only after full realization. And full realization cannot even be spoken of other than gestured to in those words. We have no idea what it means. But we know that in the meantime, we're going to have our better and better understanding, our greater and greater faith, our greater and greater courage. And one of the things that we discover is that the more we ask for the attributes that we want to have, the more they manifest in our lives. That's what Jesus said so clearly. If you ask your Father for bread, will he give you a stone? If you ask your Father for a fish, will he give you a serpent? No. But we have to remember to ask. And sometimes we have the mud mind. Anything else, dears? All right. Om Hari Om. Om Asato Ma Satgamaya. Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya. Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Abir Moiti. O dearly beloved Lord, lead us from this partial understanding to full realization. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through. Light us through and through with thy everlasting shining presence. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beings everywhere. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga, Durga, Durga. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be cheerful. May you have peace of mind. May you go forward in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being. Until we see one another again, dears, what a joy to be with you. And tomorrow morning, for those of you who are interested, the talk is on the Bhakta's method of meditation. The person following the devotional path, the path of bhakti, the bhakta's method of meditation. And, each of the 4 yogas has its own aspects. We'll talk. May is a month for the study of the devotional path, bhakti yoga. So that's what we'll talk about tomorrow.
Thank you, Brother Shankara. Thank you, everybody.
Any final thought from anyone?
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Shankara. Hari Om, everybody.
Thank you.
Hari Om, Hari Om.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. Thank you all for being the sweet and wonderful spiritual aspirants that you are. Hang in there.
Thank you.